Welcome, everybody. I'm very excited to welcome you to the MetaReviewer full release launch webinar. Thank you all for joining us, either live or watching this recorded. I'm so excited to be joined by two of my close colleagues, Ryan Williams and Sarah Pecco-Spicer, who will each be introducing themselves in a minute. For now, though, I'm Josh Polanin. I'm a principal researcher at the American Institutes for Research. I'm one of the lead developers of MetaReviewer, and this has been a decade idea in the making, and so it's very exciting to see it live today. So thank you all for being a part of that. I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention that we are funded by the National Science Foundation through two grants now, and through the American Institutes for Research, their equity initiative. They have been grateful enough to provide us with funding to keep MetaReviewer free, and not just freemium, where some of the features are free and then you have to pay for some of the premium features, but free for everything. And so we're very grateful for their support.
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here to talk about some of the latest and greatest around MetaReviewer. I'm Ryan Williams. I'm also a principal researcher at AIR, and I've been working with Josh and others on this project and other projects involving research synthesis and meta-analysis for quite a while. And so if you're familiar with kind of the steps in a systematic review, ranging from kind of problem formulation to searching electronic literature sources and screening all of that, you end up with a pile of studies and maybe electronic records that you need to maybe do some additional full text screening on and eventually coding and analysis on. And that's kind of where we're going to step in here today and are thinking about what we saw and still see as kind of some needs in the field and some of the motivation for MetaReviewer. So once you get through all of that screening process, you have all of this information that requires some additional information extraction, and you need to organize that information in some way to track the decisions that are being made along the way about what's eligible for your eventual analyses and what's ineligible, and eventually getting into more detailed data extraction. Usually when reviewers are in this phase, once they've gotten through their screening, they start looking to a range of different software platforms to assist them along the way, or at least this is kind of how it's happened in a lot of contexts, including our own projects. So we really saw a need for some software and some systems that are built with new users in mind, folks that don't have the requisite or the pre-existing experiences and background in systematic review and meta-analysis. And we also wanted to keep equity at the forefront. So as Josh mentioned, everything that we've been developing around MetaReviewer is free, or at least that's the way we think it should be. And that's what we did. So we with funding, as Josh said, from NSF and AIR, we've developed MetaReviewer, and we think that this software is hitting at least these initial objectives. We have some additional ideas of where it will go in the future, but it facilitates collaborative systematic review and meta-analysis. So here's kind of where MetaReviewer is in its kind of current evolution. So at the earlier launch, we had kind of codebook and database creation functionality, and some study effect size extraction functionality built in. We now have full text screening built into the process, along with some other functions that we'll go through today.
Hi, everyone. I kind of want to just orient you to what you see when you first log into MetaReviewer. For beta users, this is a probably new and exciting look. But we've kind of created a space where you can go in and see all of your existing projects, a space where you can access resources, and a space where you can go to create new projects. We have a project setup tool that should look familiar to any of our beta users. It has a few very easy steps: naming your project, adding users to your project. We have a coding form wizard that walks you through some questions so you can select a template for a coding form that maps onto the code book that you've developed, and then a step to import any citations you already have. Importantly, we want to kind of just show you an example of what these coding form templates look like. They always start with some language that provides guidance on how to use them, how to transfer them into the project space, and also how to update items in the template. Some key features that I want to orient you to. The template is always going to be organized into this table of contents. So you'll have a page with items for your coding form about study information, sample characteristics, condition characteristics, measures, study quality, and effect size information. And importantly, users can edit this coding form in a number of ways. They can add pages to this table, and they can also edit within the table. And you'll see an example of kind of what this looks like. Let me zoom out just a little bit. All the tables will kind of start with a table to let you know what that page will be, and it follows up with tables for each item that is included in your study information page of your coding form. One feature that I'm sure Josh will get to later, but I can preview for you, is we've done a lot of really hard work to include as many possible items as we think you could need to be able to code up effect size information. So that is where Josh will get into some of the how all the different measures and samples and conditions can be coded into this, and what it looks like on the back end, and also a list of, I think, 40 some odd effect sizes that MetaReviewer will pull information for.
Sarah already showed you what it looks like when you first enter. And so just to go back out to that, I'm going to click on projects here. The project landing page, project portal page, excuse me, is what we're calling it now. Looks about the same. See a list of all of your projects. You can delete the projects now pretty easily, and you can also rename them. If you go inside of a project, you'll see that we've redesigned this space as well, at least redesigned from the beta user perspective, to make it a little bit easier to navigate. Your assignments are all listed down here on this pane, and we've got management information on this pane. I'm going to click on the studies portal button, which will take you to a list of all the studies that are included to screen into code. So I'm going to scroll over to the right here where you can see the coding section, and you can just see there's basic information you'd see. We set this up like it's an Excel file. So who the coders are and where they are in the status, and some additional tagged features. One really nice thing that we think is going to really help project management is the ability to filter directly in the studies portal. So each one of these drop downs up here, or boxes up here, is a drop down that lists all the different ways that you can filter on the rows. So if I just wanted to filter, say, to the ones that I was assigned to reconcile, I could easily do that. I could also filter on anything that was eligible. So now I'm only seeing the rows where the study is eligible and that I'm assigned as a reconciler. Alternatively, if you wanted to just see the rows where nobody is assigned, you could click on that, and then you can start assigning yourself as a reconciler, or whatever coder 1, coder 2, whatever you need to be. Each row is clickable, and when you click on each row, you go into what we call the individual study page. And here's really where you're tracking the progress and what's going on with that study at a particular time. So you can assign screeners, or you can assign yourself as a screener. You can assign yourself a coder or a reconciler or a validator. We've got a workflow for reference harvesting, for author querying, and then on the right-hand panel are now where the statuses live. So whether or not it's eligible, where it is in the screening status, if it needs to be reference harvested, where it is in the coding, and the AQ status, and then finally, if you need to, if it's included in the meta-analysis or not. So more to say, the next thing I want to talk about is effect size calculation. So I'm going to go back and I've set up a project that I've called Launch Webinar. There's only one study in this project, and I've set up one response, one coding form response. And in this coding form response, I'm going to demonstrate our new effect size estimation functionality. So again, if I click on this button, it will create a new response. But what I want to do is go back to an old one that I created. So I'm going to click on this to view the responses. That shows me that I've created one. I'm going to click on it again, and it shows me the information that I've already captured. So if you're familiar with MetaReviewer, if you've used it before, this should look somewhat familiar to you, although the interface is basically completely changed in terms of the way it looks on the page. You'll actually be able to see here pretty quickly that now instead of using, if you remember if you've used it before, there was a small space to capture the information. We've used the entire screen now. The rest of it is set up in the way that MetaReviewer was set up before. We have some videos and some tutorials about setting up coding forms and how to interact with the coding forms in MetaReviewer itself. So I'm not going to walk through each of those steps. What I am going to do instead is go to the effect size information page where I've already set up some effect size information to demonstrate to you what we've done in this update with MetaReviewer. So you can see I've already added a row here, and you can think of this like if you're used to using Excel, this is a row in your spreadsheet, and we're going to capture information that tells us about the contrast of interest, the effect size contrast. So in this case, we are capturing information about the full sample size. Both sample 1 and sample 2 are represented here by their full characteristics. But then we're going to contrast the intervention group, which I've labeled IO1-INT, like this. And we're going to contrast that with the comparison group, which I've labeled IO2-COM, of course, for comparison group. So that's the contrast, intervention versus the comparison group. We've got actually 2 different measures. I put 2 different measures here. This one is going to estimate the effect for reading, and it's measured at both pre-test and post-test. So I've captured that for both measure 1 and measure 2 here. And then I've forgotten to put in the effect size ID, so I'm just going to go ahead and add that right now. This is going to be effect size 01. And then for this particular effect size, they provided the pre-test and the post-test unadjusted means, and it's on the same exact test. So you can imagine it being, maybe it's the exact same items or the exact same form. It's on the exact same scale. That's important because there's actually 2 ways that we can calculate a pre-test, post-test standardized mean difference, depending on whether or not the pre-test and post-test are on the same scale. There's actually a different formula for if they're not. We can show you where those formulas live, but for now, that's the difference in how we calculate it. So when I click this, some fields open up, and those fields are the ones that we need to populate in order to estimate the effect size and the effect sizes variance. So in this particular case, we need the pre-test sample size for the intervention group, the post-test sample size for the intervention group, the comparison pre-test sample size, and so on. The means, standard deviations at pre-test, and then the means, standard deviations at post-test, in addition to the pre-test, post-test correlation. Now, I've already input all this information, so the last thing we should see on the far right-hand side is the effect size, which we do see, and I'm actually going to zoom in here. Now, I meant to do this a minute ago, but maybe one less, right there. And so now, what we'll see is the effect size and its variance, and this effect size now is the standardized mean difference, the difference in difference actually of the post-test minus the pre-test, and the effect sizes variance. Okay, so that's all well and good, but that information was already in there when we started. So what about if we had some new information that we wanted to enter? Well, in that case, we could add another row, another effect size, and fill out this information. So maybe this time it's for, we've got specific group information on just kindergartners. So in this case, we're gonna select the kindergartners as the sample. We've still got intervention and comparison group data, so I'm gonna select those two drop downs. But now let's say, well, they've collected math information. So we're gonna say this is the math outcome. And this time all we have is the post-test. So I'm gonna label it the post-test, and the effect size is the second effect in this particular study record. So I'm gonna label it ESO2. Now when I click this, we see a list of effect sizes that MetaReviewer will either estimate for you or at a minimum tell you which information is required so that you can estimate the effect sizes. So one of the things that we've done in this particular version is, as you've seen, updated MetaReviewer so it will calculate effect sizes for you, but we don't quite have them all ready yet. We have like 15 effect sizes, the standardized mean differences that it will calculate for you. We're working on many other ones, odds ratios, correlations, standardized mean differences from clustered trials as well. This just, it's purely a time and logistics thing. We just haven't quite updated the software enough or really the coding forms enough to capture all these different effect sizes. They'll be coming out. We expect for them to be in here within a year or so. But for now, if you were to click on one of these effect size types, the fields would appear that you or your team would need to populate in order for you to calculate the effect size. So we've done part of the work for you. But what we're really interested in right now is calculating the effect size within MetaReviewer. And so I'm just going to go ahead and select, let's just pretend that we have the unadjusted means and the standard deviation. So when I do that, now, so this is post-test only, again. Now the fields that appear, you can see this, are just the fields that we need to enter information into. So I'm going to put some basic information in here. So 20 people in the intervention group, 20 people in the comparison group. And now you'll see we're not going to enter anything for the pre-test because again, we've said that it's only post-test. And so now we're going to say, okay, there was a post-test mean for the intervention group of 2 and maybe a standard deviation of 1. I like to make this simple on myself so that I can kind of estimate this in my head. We'll keep everything else simple. So the comparison group mean is of 1 and the standard deviation is of 1. And because it's just post-test only, we don't have the correlation. And when we do that, we get some two new columns that open up that represent just the standardized mean difference for the post-test only. And we can see that the estimated effect is 0.98 with a lot of other trailing values, and the variance is 0.112. I've calculated, you might be saying, well, how do we know that's right? I've calculated this effect size enough to tell you that those are the exact numbers. If you go to R or Dave Wilson's effect size calculator, or just pull up Excel and try to estimate the effect, you should get a 0.98 for the effect size and 0.112 for the variance. We have done pretty extensive testing, validation testing on the effect size calculations. We've used Metaphor's ESCalc function. We've used Excel. We've used a few other ways to try to validate that the effects are correct. Of course, there might be errors or mistakes. So if you see something in these effects that we've calculated that you think is incorrect, please let us know. I should say that right now, because the functionality goes all the way out to like the 10th decimal place, if you see something wrong on the 9th decimal place, okay, all right, we probably will say thank you. But we're pretty confident that at least up until the 3rd or 4th decimal place, these are correct. We're really excited about this feature. In addition to just in addition to giving you the correct information, we think that adding this information is really great feedback for all users, but especially for users who are new to meta-analysis, learning meta-analysis for the first time. Being able to see what the estimated effect is and whether or not it's in the normal range is something that is really powerful. We all know, or if you've done any meta-analysis at all, you know that an effect size within about standard or a effect size about -1 to +1 is about correct, and certainly within -2 to +2 is in the realm of possibility. Anything bigger than that, and you've probably done something wrong in the information you've captured or in the way that you've put it in there. So having that immediate feedback built right into the application, we think is going to be really powerful for everybody, but especially for those more junior researchers.
I am going to pick up and introduce you all to another feature that we're really excited about, which is reconciliation in MetaReviewer. So right now you can see I'm open to my project's portal page, and I'm going to navigate to the cyberbullying toy example problem. You can see in this project space, I have all of my assignments. Unlike the project space Josh showed you earlier, this one has a few more assignments. Before I show you how reconciliation works and what it would look like for the reconciler, I want to just show you an important feature to get things set up for reconciliation. So as a first step, any project admin can always go into the space manage coding forms and view responses. And in this space, you'll see any of the coding forms that have been uploaded for your project. And so typically that'll include a form for screening and then a form for coding. In each of these rows, you'll be able to see the number of responses that have been submitted for those forms, and you'll also see a series of icons. You have icons where you can edit the forms. You have icons where you can view the responses for the forms, and then you have this select fields icon. So I'm going to click on that for this coding form. Here you'll see kind of something that looked like the coding form that Josh had up, where you can navigate to each page of it. But importantly, this form just lists the items for each page and a checkbox for those items. And this is a place where project admin or PIs can go in and say, for instance, there are some fields on this form that I don't want to have contribute to % agreement calculations for reconcilers while they're working. So for most of the coding form templates in MetaReviewer, someone is going to want to go in and remove these validated and validator notes fields that we have. And so that's a space where you can go do that. I am going to navigate back out to our project, the cyberbullying toy example, and I'm going to go into this study where I am somehow serving as coder 1, coder 2, and the You'll see I can scroll down to the study screening and coding forms panel, and there's 2 responses that I've submitted to this coding form. And so I'm going to go ahead and click view responses. And so this will open me up to a response page that is specific to this study ID. You can see I've coded these 2 responses, I've submitted them, and they're ready to be reconciled. So I'm going to click this button, reconcile. And the very first thing it's going to do is to ask me to match up or select the records from each coder that I'd like to reconcile. The next thing it'll do is open us up to this reconciliation modal. And so one of the things to know about MetaReviewer is that by default, as you start entering, and maybe I can show a quick example. When you start entering information about a sample or a condition or a measure, you have the option to enter multiple columns of data. So you might say, I want to enter information about the treatment condition and information about the control condition. You can imagine that there's two kind of issues that might arise here, is that if people are coding independent of one another, they might use different names for their treatment or control conditions, and they might enter it in a different order. And so if we go back to that reconciliation modal, what we get to use that for is to match up the like columns from both colors. And so there's kind of a few ways that you can use this modal. The first thing that you might do is just like look at this quick snapshot and see the IDs that the coders entered. And so I might look at this and say, okay, they both entered the C1 film. They entered this ID that looks a little different, but because these two seem to be the same, I might imagine that these two are the same. And I can also see among the responses that they included related to those conditions that the percent agreement on one of them seems pretty high. You can also go in and look at the details for that match for any one of these rows. This gives you another snapshot where you can see the actual responses that they've submitted and make your own assessment about whether or not you're comparing the same thing. So anything that is a disagreement between the two coders is going to be highlighted in red, but you can use this to say, oh, they're both kind of coding a control condition. They may have disagreed on some things, but I think that this is probably, they're talking about the same condition. So if we were to go into the measures tab and do the same thing, we can immediately see that these are probably mismatched because of the order in which coders entered their information. And this is kind of confirmed by the percent agreement that we're seeing for the responses on that particular page, and confirmed again when we open this page and see that they're even describing these measures differently. And so here, all you need to do is kind of a click and drag to align the records that you want to do the same thing on this page, and then click reconcile. So that will open a reconciliation form for your reconciler, which again is still going to look for the most part like a coding form with a few key differences. So one of them is that you have a drop-down menu, which now tells you how many conflicts exist on which pages. You can see the overall percent agreement. And remember, the denominator of that percent agreement is defined in that kind of checkbox area I pointed out before we opened the reconciliation forms. And you have a drop-down menu that if you were to navigate to a page like sample characteristics, tells you how many conflicts are on that page. And when you click the drop-down menu, it tells you exactly where you can find those conflicts. So if we were to scroll down, there's a few ways that you can resolve conflicts in MetaReviewer. The first thing you can do is anywhere you see this red alert icon, that is a place where a conflict exists. You can see the response or the selection that coder 1 made versus coder 2, and you might say, okay, I think coder 1 is right that it's unclear and coder 2 should have sent that, in which case you can simply click their response and it'll be logged and resolved. You might see here, coder 2 left no response for this question about the percentage of participants in the sample that were assigned male at birth. If I go down to this question though, I see that coder 2 just put the response in a different place. And so I may go up here and I might select coder 1's response, but I might also say, for instance, that I don't really think this is a conflict. They just put information in a slightly different place and I don't want to count it as a conflict. In which case, all I have to do is to update this mark as conflict piece. And as you keep doing that, you'll see that your percent agreement will adjust accordingly. One other way that you might choose to resolve conflict, so we can go to this question. Well, no, let's go to this one. In this question where coder 1 had said, you know, there's 100% of the participants in this sample are identified as white and coder 2 left no response. As a reconciler, if I see different information, I can also just enter my own information here and accept neither of the responses and move on. You can then navigate to the next page and continue to work through any place where you see a red alert icon. The last thing that I want to show you is there might be occasions where even if you've spent time in that reconciliation modal matching up responses, you might find yourself second guessing whether you made the right decision. In that event, you can always go to this little source column value in the beginning of any columns and click on it to reopen the modal and double check that you've made the right choices. And if you feel like you didn't, you can select a new column and choose to reconcile that column. I think, oh, and one last thing I'd like to point out is in the event that for any of these kind of style questions that are organized in columns, so conditions, samples, measures, and effect sizes, if you find that both of your coders failed to code information about, let's say, another condition, you can always add a column and enter all of that information yourself. So that's just a little sneak peek at reconciliation, and like some of the other things that we shared today, there's a lot more in the works here that we're excited to roll out over the next year or so.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about data download functionality that's built into MetaReviewer. And so as I mentioned earlier, and as you've been seeing, and maybe you're already familiar with a little bit of the functionality of MetaReviewer, everything's kind of happening within these coding forms, which are kind of nice front ends and kind of visually organized. But there's a lot happening on the back end with the actual microdata that's being entered and stored. And sometimes we want to access that information. Maybe there's a few different types of data sets that we want to access in real time. I know I like to peek at my data every once in a while just to see what it's actually looking like on the other end and see if that has any implications for how I proceed with the project. And so I'll go through a few different versions of data set downloads that we have here. One that talks about kind of full data capture from complete study codes, kind of effect size level data. And then we'll also talk about two additional versions of downloading kind of study level or citation level data from those corresponding portals. And in addition to just glancing at the kind of back-end spreadsheet format data, this is also kind of the mechanism for export into external software that might be used for your analysis. So once you're finished with everything or doing some preliminary tests of some analytical approaches you might be planning, this is what you'd be using along the way. So the first one is kind of effect size data download. So to get to the effect size level data set that you may want to meta-analyze or you may just want to glance at, all you have to do is go to the Manage Coding Forms and View Responses section. And then within the coding form row, you go to View the View Response button, and then just simply click Download. And that'll create a CSV spreadsheet file that gets downloaded onto your local machine. And so what this is going to do, it's going to kind of knit together all of the various the data from the various coding pages that define your codebook into one kind of large data set that's one big flat file with rows and columns all in one place. The process is similar for the studies portal data or the citations portal data. All you have to do is to download this data is from within each of those portals, just go to the download button that's highlighted up here in the top right corner, and you'll get some data sets that look kind of like these. So here's kind of a snapshot here of the study portal data download, which is especially useful as you're tracking kind of progress throughout your kind of screening and coding procedures along the way.
Okay, we've got a couple minutes left. We've been answering questions, or really Sarah has been answering questions along the way.
Thing that is maybe important to note about reconciliation. We received a question about whether MetaReviewer calculates agreement for all coded studies together or only agreement for each panel of the coding form. Currently, MetaReviewer calculates percent agreement for the study, like at the study level. And one of the things that we're really excited to work on is rolling that up into something that users can look to for overall agreement or other kind of synthesis-wide statistics that they'd like to consider, is one piece worth noting. Another question that was asked that is, I think, worth answering for the broader audience is, if you create a coding form, can you share it as a template with others in my organization working on different meta-analyses? And since the coding form templates are all Google documents, they're really easy to share with colleagues who want to set up a project in MetaReviewer. And there's some guidance on that in the user guide and even on the templates themselves. The one note that I'd like to make for that is that we always recommend that users share copies of those templates rather than the templates themselves, just so you can keep track of which form you're using for your project versus what other people might be using for their projects. Let's see, some open questions. So when you export data, does it export the codes from all the reviewers or only the validators' codes?
It's a very timely question because it does export all of the responses and the reconciled record as well. So if two coders were in there, if two coders entered two different responses to the same study and a reconciler went in and created their own record, a reconciled record, the export will export all three of those records to you. But each record is identified as either a response, like just a regular coder response, or the reconciled response. So you'd be able to easily filter to just the reconciled responses and analyze those as you would any meta-analysis. In the future, we're working on an algorithm that helps MetaReviewer select the reconciled records for you. We'll probably also create an interface where you can select the record that you want exported. But for now, we're exporting everything to you.
Josh, do you need a .edu email address to register for MetaReviewer?
You don't. You don't need one. Any email address will work. That's because it's open and free and accessible to anybody. We're not going to institutions asking them to pay for this. We're not limiting access to people who work in particular sectors or particular countries or parts of the world. Anybody can access MetaReviewer and use it for free. So I'm noticing that we are very close to time, and I'm nothing if not a stickler for staying on time. This was already a big ask of your all's time and my colleagues' time for presenting and for you all for listening on Friday afternoon. So before we go, I just want to acknowledge a couple more people, aside from the folks on this call, Megan Austin in particular, who's our project director, but also the incredible staff that we have working on MetaReviewer to put this together. Something like this takes an incredible lift from a lot of dedicated people who have been working on it, not just since the beta launch, but a year before that. This is really 2 years in the making. Charlie and Laura and Sarah and John and Yusuf and Craig and Charisse and Martha, Sanju and Nick, everybody has worked so hard to make this a reality. We had a ton of great alpha testers. We had a lot of interest in the beta version. Over 250 people signed up to use the beta version. And a lot of you, or a good proportion of you, emailed us with suggestions and comments. And also everybody who just said congratulations and we're looking forward to it. We see all of that, and I see all of it. So thank you for all of that. We have two incredible advisors, Sola and Erica, who help us along the way. They're the ones who pushed for reconciliation. So if you like reconciliation and you know them, reach out to them and say thanks for that. I'm just so grateful to all of these people, and the fact that we get to do this. This is really a dream, and we're going to keep working on it and keep making it better. So if you see things that you want changed or want new features or just want to help us think about what comes next, please feel free to reach out to us and email. And with that, I'll go ahead and wrap things up. Sarah, Ryan, always great to do this with you guys. I appreciate it. And we'll see you all in MetaReviewer.